Hello and welcome to Evaluating Cloud Strategies in 2022. I'm here today with Joe Peterson, who's the VP of Cloud and Security at Clarify 360, and Craig Chvatal, the Director of Enterprise Business Platforms and IT for Intel. And I'm really excited about today's call. Just so you know, we did record this just to make sure that the video went well, but we are standing by live to interact with you in the chat session and answer any of your questions. So without further ado, I'm just going to kick off and start talking about what's going on. And we have lots of big changes happening in the cloud. And from where I sit, there have been a lot of great moments in cloud in 2021. I mean, this was the year that cloud really became a reality for the majority of organizations across the globe. And that was pretty exciting because we've been talking about this for probably off and on about 15 years now. And some of the things that were really interesting to me about cloud in 2021 is we had a lot of investments in toolkits to support application modernization, to support the concept of multi-cloud environments. Organizations were looking at multi-cloud. We had roughly 65% in the last Lopez research benchmark said that they were participating in multi-cloud today. We saw the rise and adoption of some of the first real vertical clouds for finance and healthcare. Companies like NASDAQ went all in. So we're seeing organizations that have previously been maybe a little shy around cloud deployments, really kind of investing more heavily. We saw the emergence of hybrid cloud offerings from hardware vendors such as Dell and HPE, and lots of interesting innovation around that. We saw amazing innovation in processors across the stack, from CPUs to GPUs to VPUs, and great support for AI. We've seen the introduction of 5G as a service from hyperscalers, and we've also seen some of the challenges supporting cloud, such as moving to multi-cloud sounds simpler than it is. We've had some staffing issues, complexity in learning multiple ways of doing things, a lot of opportunities and a lot of confusion around getting there. And so that's one of the reasons why we're here. And I know Intel actually just worked with IDC on a paper called Evaluating Cloud Strategies in 2022. And I'm going to put a link to that report in the chat so that you can go check out what was said there. But it basically talks about, some of the key themes: hybrid cloud being beneficial due to flexibility. It's no longer about speeds and feeds. We're really trying to create agility and have infrastructure play a more strategic role, and really help, customers navigate how to look at the different workloads, because different workloads have different requirements. So without further ado, let me just jump into it and see what our panelists have to say about this. Joe, coming out of 2021, we're seeing a lot of acceleration in cloud, but do you see that acceleration is going to continue, or do you think companies are stepping back or considering other options?
I think it's full steam ahead. And thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today. So let's take a look at some of what's coming out. According to Gartner, infrastructure as a service is projected to grow 36.8% to 895 million by the end of 2022. So right now. And so if you take a look at that, that's a 36.8% projected growth from last year. That doesn't tell me like anybody stepping back from anything.
It's massive.
Massive, right? So let's take a minute and look at what it means at the enterprise level. Statista reports that as of late 2020, 36% of enterprises indicated that their organizations spent more than 12 million US dollars on public cloud every year. That's a big number. In some enterprise shops, overall cloud spend constitutes 30% of the total IT budget. Crazy, right? So that said, I think 2022, we're going to see hyperscalers focus on vertical specialization, sort of what you had mentioned, Maribel. That's starting. We're just starting to see that. They'll start with highly regulated industries, as you indicated, such as financial institutions. And there's been this sort of shift away from feature abundance to compliance abundance. That's what folks care about. Which cloud provider can make me compliant the fastest and in the most straightforward way? That said, I think that hybrid everything is here to stay, particularly related to cloud data and analytics. Business leaders are going to come to realize the advantage of hybrid models. So that's what I think.
I really love where you're going with this concept of the hybrid everywhere, because I do think that one of the things that we were missing that was really very interesting is there was a customer momentum for hybrid, and this is why we saw the response from both the hyperscalers and also the technology vendors to find a way for people to basically keep the workloads where they wanted to keep them based on the different characteristics of that. So I absolutely agree with that. What are you thinking, Craig? Here to
Yeah.
stay, fad?
Oh, here to stay. Intel has always taken a kind of a hybrid approach, and coming out of 2021, what we saw internally was what became most important was the ability to be agile over any kind of cost. At some point, when COVID hit in 2020, and it was, everybody needs to work from home, and we're going to shut down the economy. It became well, how do we support a workforce literally overnight? And so, as an enterprise architect at Intel, we've always viewed in the cloud as a on-demand services, and the availability of those things that are just available, and it's part of the architecture that we would use, whether it be a private cloud or on-premises, hosting or in a public cloud. And so, here to stay. And one of the places where we used it quite extensively is that when COVID did hit, we needed to go from being able to support with our VPN capacity literally overnight. We needed to double it from about 50,000 users that we needed that we were using on a daily basis to ability to support over 100,000 people dialing in remotely. And the only way to do that was to spin that up in the cloud almost immediately. So we had a team that worked 4 to 5 days, literally 24/7, to spin that up, so that come to work on Monday morning, people basically came in and did their job from their house. And then that burst capacity we could have never done, in a hybrid mode. But then we were able to, over the next couple of months, though, as with that stabilized, we actually we pulled the servers in place, and we actually pulled that back in house to our private cloud. So that idea of the bursting out to a public cloud when you need it was something we used. We also used it to, with this idea of video conferencing and that sort of thing. We accelerated our plans and use of the cloud in that space. Again, mainly, to get both on premises and through VPN, and then back out to the cloud, and it became seamless. And then I did want to mention real quickly, though, one of the other things we're seeing is your point about both verticalization. I see it slightly different. One of the things that we're really excited about is we see the cloud providers are moving beyond just doing services and actually putting those services together in a framework that you can then you can use with a like a well-architected piece and or strategy around that. And that's something we're actually very interested in, versus just picking and choosing services, actually putting them together for a solution.
I think we're actually starting to see a lot of the same things. One of the things that I thought was really very wonderful about cloud in 2021 was that it was for small companies and for large companies as well. So I've spoken to companies such as smaller wineries that went from doing 20% of their business online to 85% of their business online, seemingly overnight. I've talked to municipal governments that were looking at a basically 3 to 4x almost overnight increase in their unemployment discussions that they had to have, and needing to basically stand up remote call centers to make all that happen so that they could do it in a remote fashion. And then one of the big heroes of technology has been to allow everybody to do all that great takeout food and curbside pickup. So we saw many companies gravitating towards software as a service and scalable cloud models so that they could support online ordering and curbside pickup. So we've seen it across all the different marketplaces, be them small companies, be them larger companies. We've seen it in a wide different range of everything from video conferencing to the software that allows you to service a customer directly. So really big and exciting time in cloud. But one of the things that we also saw is that workloads are growing more complex. They're large, they're diverse. And one of the things I know a lot of organizations are struggling with is how do they optimize their workloads today, given that they're becoming more complex, they're becoming more diverse? I mean, Joe, have you been discussing this with any of your clients?
Absolutely. So it's important to me when we talk about optimization that we realize that it's really what we're really talking about is business efficiency. It's much more than cost optimization, right? It's the process of correctly selecting and assigning the right resources to a workload or application. So workload performance, compliance, and cost are correctly and continually balanced for the best fit for the organization. And it's always this, we're starting to see this delicate balance between finance department who wants to control the spend and the application owners who never want to hear that the resources for their apps are being reduced, right? So this thing is starting to happen. The good news is that there are tangible optimization use cases for both public and hybrid cloud footprints, like Craig was chatting about. The infrastructure as a service providers are coming out with frameworks and they're saying, hey, this is the way you should really take a look at this. But we say that there's three best practices that you've got to sort of think about through the lens. We say, take a look at workload modeling, service matching, and optimization recommendations, right? And then take a look at cost and visibility and optimization. And then the third thing is, if you've gotten that far along, are you automated? And are you continuously optimizing? And think about it as a process, right? It's a loop. So if you really haven't started getting your arms around that yet, you need to do that, because this is going to be one great cost on your balance sheet that your CFO is going to come knocking on your door and going, hey, what's going on with that? So
I want some of that money back.
back, please. So
We need a travel budget again.
yeah, right.
I really like where you're going, because I think people do need a framework to understand this. And there's been this whole FinOps discussion that's happening around cloud. And one of the really interesting aspects of that for the people that I think are doing it very well is they're looking at it not just in terms of how much it costs, but what workloads are costing the business. And does it make sense to spend that much on these workloads versus other workloads? So I do think it's getting into really refining, where are you deriving value in your business? And are you actually matching your spend to the things that deliver the most value in your business? So that's another perhaps nuance that people could start to look at in that whole frame. Craig, what about you? You're kind of in the front lines actually experiencing some of this.
Yeah. At Intel's over 50 years old, and like any company, we have what's affectionately known as tech debt, and that's where you haven't quite replaced a legacy system with a new system yet. So, and then you have overlapping capabilities, and that just adds to the complexity. Then you add in things like supply chain, some supply chain issues you've heard about worldwide. A new strategy at Intel that you've heard about in becoming a foundry and our foundry services. So our landscape is just becoming even more complex. Instead of making chips for yourself, you're making them for lots of other people as well, right? So lots of new systems coming in and needing to modernize, along with keeping the legacy systems that are running your business. So extreme complexity. And at Intel, what we do, at some level, there's no magic. It really comes down to get what we call like application portfolio management. And we continuously are looking, and working with our business partners on where their critical business needs are and what are the right solutions there. And it comes down to things like, business process mapping to find inefficiencies, looking at business capability maps, particularly where there's overlapping technologies that are serving very similar needs, or some of that tech debt that hadn't been removed. Taking a look at your total portfolio. And then finally, it's from those things come the opportunities that allow you to decide whether I want to keep, spin up something new, sunset something, maybe move something over to the cloud, take that workload and move it to the cloud, or keep it on premises in that hybrid fashion. And there's a bunch of different things that we use to make that final decision around workload type and latency and those sorts of things, and security and those sorts of things. But it comes down to really good business conversations and the business process and capability mapping ultimately.
I've actually spoken to some clients that had thousands of apps. Like one of them had 9,000 apps, and clearly 9,000 apps weren't going to transition.
2,000 plus, and just in IT, and then more in the business. Yes.
Right. And I think that this is actually a very good opportunity to think about, what are the things that actually matter for the business moving forward. And one of the things I've been talking to companies about is also this concept of right sizing. There's not one set of infrastructure for every single workload. If you're looking at SAP, you might want a specific type of infrastructure. If you're looking at doing real-time analytics for sensor data coming from a manufacturing floor, that might be a different type of workload that you're starting to look at. So I think this mapping is going to be the critical skill for business leaders and IT leaders to get together on and to talk about, what is that workload type? Is it predictable or not? Things of that nature. So a lot of interesting insights there.
Yeah, and I would just mention it, like Joe, you were saying, it's a loop too, right? It's not just a one-time thing. You need to continuously look at it because that workload can change, and you might be more efficient to move it either to the cloud or bring it or repatriate it back to on premises.
And I tell people all the time, you can find dollars in your cloud to go do other things, right? Like that's the carrot. It's not a financial conversation. It's the carrot with the business. Like, okay, you guys want to spin up a new app. Did you optimize your existing footprint? Have you done that? Well, because I bet you we can find you some money there so that you can go just do this new thing. So it becomes more of, I don't really care if we're saving money or not. It becomes, how do I get this new project off the ground?
Yeah.
That is definitely the way to get the excitement around it and the funding around it. And absolutely, I think this whole concept of lifecycle management with everything, whether or not you're looking at software or your cloud spend or your AI models, it is a life cycle. It's a continuous loop. Craig, I'm sure that it's been an interesting time at Intel, and I'm really curious to what's your overall cloud strategy, and are there any best practices that you can impart on our enterprise IT audience?
Yeah, I'll stay at a high level here, but yeah, basically we've always, our cloud strategy is simply to strategically use public and private cloud resources. Again, I see it as it's tools in a toolbox, but simply stated, it's our business needs drive our application needs, drive then our workload placement, and that workload placement could be in any of the couple different locations. But from a technical perspective, our cloud strategy is all about hybrid and multi-cloud around agility and cost vectors. Agility and particularly with the cloud, or what COVID has shown us in this last 2 years, is agility trumps cost in many cases if you're needing to do something. So we moved away from an infrastructure-based cloud strategy to one that really focuses on business needs and applications. So it is business need driven, but some best practices inside of that, aside from like simply stated around, in the technical pieces of it, we look at first, from a best practices perspective, we look at business functions, and is it a standardized function? Does everybody needs to close their books, right? Everybody has a finance function or sales and marketing or HR needs and that sort of thing. And in that part of the strategy, we're a SaaS first, right? So a software as a service, and can we just go and rent the software? Now that SaaS first doesn't mean SaaS only, but that would be the focus. Then inside of there, you have differentiated things where we have either established workloads or it's very core to Intel's business. We take our high performance compute and design area as an example, and that's places where we know the workload, or we know the organic growth of that, or in our product development, very differentiated for Intel. And in that case, we'll typically host that as a first look at our private cloud, and then we'll burst out if we need to. And again, it's around automation and cost optimization. Really, is because it's such a large piece of infrastructure. And then you've got this emerging needs area, which is really where we don't know the demand. It could be, we were in the sports business for a while, or geospatial, or the new Foundry services, where we haven't seen, we have hockey stick projections or something, but you don't really know what you're going to need. And this is a place where we regularly we'll go and we'll start out in the public cloud and use the services out there. And then as those workloads become more well known, we'll decide what we're going to do with them, either to continue to expand it, or it's something that you might want to move back to our own private cloud. Then in final all of those, we do something that we call with those three things, what we affectionately call the 3 C's, which is cost, capabilities, and controls. And in many cases, with the controls we have in place with our InfoSec team, it's not so much whether we can put it out put it out in the public cloud or want to keep it on site, but it's going to come down to really capability and cost. And so there are just capabilities that I can turn on that I don't have to go build. I want to go and use those. And then the cost piece is kind of like what both a baseline and a peak thing over like a 3 or 4 year horizon is what we look at. So those are some best practices: the business function, and then put it up against then the 3 C's.
I love that. And once again, I think we're getting back to workloads, and I guess that brings me to a question that I was thinking about for Joe. Have you seen, because you're talking to a lot of people, the viewpoints change on what workloads are better suited for the cloud versus on-premises? I mean, are enterprises dealing with repatriation? What are some of the big decisions that you think people are making in 2021?
So it's interesting because I've seen this focus on business continuity and business resilience, right? Folks are, if they didn't have that in place before, the pandemic made them think about that. And so do we have this in place? And, not to mention any names here, but there was a great big old cloud outage last Friday. And
yes, there was.
And yes, and so I want us to say to y'all, keep it simple. If you don't have HA built in, because the cloud provider is not going to build in HA for you, you need to build in HA, right? It just doesn't magically happen. So there was all this flurry on social media of folks like, well, should we get out of the cloud now? How about HA first? How about that? Right?
Exactly.
So there's you've got to decide what's right for your business, right? I don't think we're seeing holistic repatriation, but I think we're seeing some elements of the equation being looked at more closely, like cloud storage. That's an area where companies have to do the math. And they have to go, wait, does it make more sense to store my data in the cloud from both a financial, usability, regulatory, and DR perspective? Or are there elements like regulatory restrictions that might move the needle, for me to do it maybe premise-based, right? You get into certain countries of the world, and that's getting tighter. Certain countries of the world say, for example, you can't move your data out of here. Your data has to stay here. Germany is a good example of that. Spain, right? And
China upcoming.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think that it's not so much about repatriation, it's about keeping in line with the current thinking around regulatory restraints, around financial cost, right? It's not an all or nothing equation.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So I've been talking, so this is something that comes up a lot when Joe and I are talking about the edge. Where do you want to process things? Do you want to take everything back to the cloud and centrally process it? Or are there reasons to keep it on-prem or close to where the data is created? So security, compliance, latency, cost, the need to have something happen in real time or not, which is slightly different than latency, because you could have some latency, but some things you just want to have it processed right there and know the answer right away. So I think that there's a lot of discussion around how do we map workloads as a result of these different requirements. But the good news is I think we have lots of different options. Craig, what are you thinking on this topic?
I was just going to say, we've always been super thoughtful about where we place our workloads and how we place it to, some of the things I mentioned a minute ago. And so there hasn't been, we haven't seen that much change internally. It's the same. We still use the same process. And, I mentioned the having to burst for the VPN capacity overnight and then bringing that back on. So definitely don't see a huge shift, and at least for Intel.
Got it. One of the things that I think we've been talking a lot about is, okay, we've talked about digital transformation forever. That's nothing new. We've talked about moving to the cloud. Also nothing new. Now we're talking about multi-cloud, we're talking about hybrid clouds. I feel like we're getting many more variants of cloud that we can look at. So how should companies be thinking about the hybrid cloud? Joe, would you like to start on this? And then maybe Craig, you can give your thoughts.
Sure. I think walking into 2022, CEOs have the message loud and clear about scaling digitalization and building e-commerce. So one of our South American retail clients, who was traditionally brick and mortar until the end of 2020, their CEO came in and said, we're going online, we have to. And by the way, for a little color, they do about 4 billion in annual sales, right? So that's a lot of revenue that was premise based. So the CEO knew that a digital approach was going to be a make or break for her organization during the pandemic. Today, about 25% of total revenue, so a little bit over a year and a half, or a billion, came from online or comes from online. That's pretty phenomenal when you think about it. So CIOs are tasked with delivering digitalization at this pace to sort of meet the CEO's demands. And in order to do that, they have to ensure that they have technical foundations that are going to allow them to rapidly grow and scale. What we're seeing is hybrid is the way to build that bridge and sort of continue to scale safely. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's an and answer.
Got it. Craig?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been a hybrid focus for many years. We've had a very strong data. So our private cloud, we've had infrastructure as a service, with self-service options internally, the ability to do databases as a service with, 16,000 instances deployed of database, 5 different types of database types and so forth. And recently pulled in containers as a service and Kubernetes and all that as a service. We have that in our private cloud. And so where we focus then is from the hybrid part of that is we also are multi-cloud because, like I said, we really want to take advantage of the best services that are available out. And Google is well known for for TensorFlow and the Azure, and the ML capabilities they have, and Amazon is a mature across the board, and then Azure has some of its capabilities. We want to be able to pick and choose those services as we need to, and that's where the multi-cloud part comes in. But where we focus on internally or in IT is then a lot of the times is the how. How are you going about doing that? And it's about control planes and automations that Joe mentioned earlier. But really, for us then it's about getting those applications and services into containers so that if I start on premises, I can easily move and run those in containers out in the cloud, or start in cloud and make sure they're in containers and I can bring them back on premises. That giving that hybrid nature. So being able to move those things is super important to us. But it's about getting them into containers first for us. So it's more of a definitely a technical aspect to it, but that's one of the things that gives us that flexibility. And then there's another piece to this for us, which is around having an infrastructure that can deliver that same experience, so that I know that when I do burst that out to the if I'm bursting from like a container in my CAS environment out to I need to spin up and burst out in a public cloud, that it's going to run the way I expected it to. So that having that kind of similar infrastructure, knowing that infrastructure is similar, or at least supported from the same similar APIs and stuff, is super important to us. You mentioned ERP as an example earlier too about, and so one of the things that we think about from a hybrid cloud perspective as well is this idea of data gravity. And if we currently run our ERP solution on premises, but we've done some thought exercises and said, what would it take to move at any of the big 3 cloud providers? And what happens though is because of the latency and the data gravity that system has for Intel, you start moving from just taking your ERP solution, but a bunch of satellite systems that you need to start to move as a whole ecosystem with it. And so that's something that it's top of mind of us as we're thinking of a hybrid infrastructure is both the bursting from a containers perspective, but then ecosystems that I need to move and that they actually need to move together. Definitely a path to our future, and I would rather go and rent some burst capacity than buy a server that I'm going to have there for 5 years, necessarily not used.
There you go. So your data gravity discussion actually made me think about how we're digitizing everything. So maybe as a final closing question, how does this digitization impact how enterprises look at their infrastructure?
Is that for me?
Yep.
No, okay. Yeah. So, digitization of everything, and this one's a little bit for Intel specifically. First off, it's absolutely raising the stakes, the strategic importance of infrastructure. The digitization is, and it becomes all about flexibility and velocity, agility, and to meet business needs faster. But at Intel, we're already heavily digitized. In when digital twin became a popular topic, we said, wait a minute, we've had digital twin for 10 years type of thing in our high performance compute in our design space on how we model our model chips and software before we actually put it into silicon. So we're heavily digitized already. So whether it be in our transactions or our B2B businesses or our factories or our chip and software design, it's really for us about managing organic growth, which is right around 30 to 40% a year. And managing that growth is for us in the digitization. But to make it work, though, I mean, we have to have it's a huge investment in automation and standardized building blocks that you can put together that you can then scale by standardizing on those blocks. Those are the two key things, though: the automation and the standardized building blocks to make digitization happen.
So open, composable, able to automate.
There you go.
Joe, any thoughts on your side?
Well, I think Craig said it nicely, and he gave us a real world example. The business goals have to align with the IT goals in order to move the needle forward. So what many organizations are realizing in 2021 is that to obtain those promised gains, digital transformation must not just mean adopting the technologies, but actually transforming, right? They must be able to deliver value. What's the value that they're bringing to the table? I used to tell people that cloud was as much about technology of an organization as it is about the culture. And the same thing holds true for digitalization. You can do this all day long, but how are you really moving the needle? And it sounds like Intel has to do this in their own organization. So yeah, that's what I think.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank both of you for your time, attention, and insight. And I hope the audience was able to glean some great insights out of this that they can use to create their planning for 2022. And once again, there's an NIDC white paper linked into the chat. And thank you for attending.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.